Catherine Morgan-Wicks, Dr Veach and Donna Adams, the Deputy State Controller, if there are any questions about operational matters as we work our way through. Now, there's no doubt the Delta strain of COVID is posing significant challenges across the country. 452 new cases in New South Wales, 24 in Victoria. Canberra outbreak has grown to over 45 and 3 active cases in the Northern Territory. Now, whilst we have no cases in Tasmania, we remain under constant threat to the risk. That's why last week we announced that 4-point Delta Shield plan, stronger border controls, a vaccine blitz, enhanced testing, tracking and tracing, and a significant business support package. Now, it's a very difficult situation for both New South Wales and Victoria, who are both undergoing prolonged lockdowns. As I've previously said, our border restrictions will remain in place with New South Wales for the foreseeable future. Victoria and the ACT have extended their lockdowns for 2 weeks. Our border restrictions remain in place with them. Victoria, as I've previously said, could be out for up to 4 weeks, depending on how they progress. This means now that anyone from Victoria or New South Wales, including the ACT, will not be permitted to enter Tasmania unless approved as an essential traveller, and those travellers will be subject to 14 days quarantine in a suitable residence or in government quarantine in a hotel if they are from a level 1 jurisdiction or area. A stay-at-home order also continues for anyone currently in Tasmania who returned here before 4 p.m. On the 12th of August who has been in the ACT on or since the 5th of August. And yesterday from 4 p.m, the Greater Darwin and Katherine regions in the Northern Territory also declared high-risk level 2 in response to that state's lockdown. This means any person who has been in any of these Northern Territory municipalities will not be permitted to enter Tasmania from 4 p.m. yesterday unless approved as an essential traveller. Stay-at-home direction has also been implemented for anyone who has arrived in Tasmania and was in the municipalities of Darwin, Palmerston and Katherine on or since 11 p.m. on the 12th of August and arrived in Tasmania prior to 4 p.m. yesterday. In terms of Queensland, noting that there are 2 cases there today, one being an overseas traveller in quarantine, hotel quarantine, the other being somebody else that was in quarantine but linked to a case from some weeks ago. Public Health have advised that after a number of days of no new cases and community transmission, those areas currently designated as high risk will be reclassified to low risk from midnight tonight. All of Queensland will be low risk now, except for the high risk premises that will remain listed until they expire after 14 days. Information on those high risk premises and sites, of which there are currently 13, can be found on the Tas Coronavirus website. I'm sure this will be welcome news for many, and given the improving situation in Queensland and its tighter border measures with New South Wales, Public Health now believes that there is a minimal risk to the Tasmanian community. Dr Veach can provide some further details there. Our strong border controls are working, however they continue to be tested by individuals who want to flaunt the law. Yesterday a woman from Sydney was the first to receive our new double on-the-spot $1,557 fine for travelling to Tasmania after having her good to go pass rejected. Look, it is as simple as this. If you don't follow the rules, we will catch you and you will be fined. And I would urge those people that are trying to test our borders and enter Tasmania, we have very strong border controls in place. We will pick you up and you will be fined. If you come from a high-risk jurisdiction, you will be turned around and you'll be placed on the first available flight. If there's not a flight available, you'll be placed into hotel quarantine. If you travel here without a good-to-go pass and a pass that's been rejected in the past, you will be fined. It is as simple as that. Now, the rapid border closures and escalating situation in some jurisdictions on the mainland has meant that obviously our hotel quarantine facilities are being stretched. We've added the Travel Lodge in Hobart as part of our portfolio of facilities, increasing the number of rules available. We're working through the final infection controls and how we will manage that facility. But importantly, and I'd make this point, when the Travel Lodge was previously in operation, there were some MPs that wanted to stand on the footpath and seek interviews with guests walking past. That will be very strictly monitored. Police will be engaged to ensure that people can access that building appropriately and keep our community safe. Now, I do want to say to those who are considering coming to Tasmania, we want to ensure that you can do so safely. But it's important that if you don't need to come at this time, you don't come. Follow the rules in the state or jurisdiction that you're in. Stay safe. Importantly, we will manage entry to the state to ensure that we can provide a safe and secure quarantine available for you when the time is right, but importantly also to ensure that we keep our community safe. Now, importantly, we're going to introduce another border safeguard to strengthen our border controls and hotel quarantine from today. Now, anyone who is approved to travel to Tasmania from a high-risk location level 1, currently being, and I say there is a small number of returning Tasmanians and essential workers that come in from New South Wales, those who receive a travel exemption to come to Tasmania under a good-to-go process will now be required to produce a negative COVID-19 test within 72 hours of their travel to Tasmania. This test result will be able to be uploaded onto the Good to Go system prior to travel, but will ensure that yet another layer of protection and compliance is added to our already strong systems. So to be clear, if you're looking to travel here and you're seeking a Good to Go exemption, if that's granted, you will need to have a test within the 72 hours. It'll need to be and then upload those results, and obviously only a negative test result is going to enable you to come here from that high-risk jurisdiction of New South Wales as it stands at the moment. Now, a critical element of our Delta Shield plan is the Super 6 vaccination program. It's well underway. Our aim is to have more than 63% of Tasmanians having had a first dose by 12 September, and we're on track, currently sitting at just below 54% of people that are eligible above the age of 16 having received their first vaccination, and importantly, almost 1 in 3 eligible Tasmanians are now fully vaccinated, and Catherine Morgan-Wicks will provide more detail on that. I'm pleased to announce today that our program is going to further gather pace with the establishment of 2 new Pfizer super clinics in Hobart and Burnie. The Hobart Super Clinic will be held at Mac 2 on Macquarie Wharf on the weekend of the 28th and 29th of August, aiming to deliver over the course of that weekend around 2,000 doses, and the Burnie Super Clinic at the Burnie Arts and Function Centre will be held on the weekend of the 11th and 12th of September, delivering the aim of another 1,400 doses across that weekend. I urge those particularly aged between 30 and 59 years who have not yet had your first dose of the vaccine to take advantage of these additional appointments and book now. Our InReach Schools program will also start next Monday with a clinic at Elizabeth College and one at Claremont College later in the week. These clinics will vaccinate 16 to 18-year-old students at their school. We need to keep up the momentum, and I urge everyone to don't wait. Vaccinate, and Kath will provide an update in terms of the legal consent requirements as well. We've taken some further advice there. She can provide that detail later. And finally, today, our $20 million business support package is open for applications from 2 p.m. today for those businesses operating in the tourism, hospitality, arts and events, seafood and transport, hire car and coach tour sectors impacted by reduced interstate visitation as a result of unnecessary border restrictions. If you believe you're impacted, having suffered a 30% decline in your turnover, please visit www.business.tas.gov.au to find out how you can register for financial support on that scale of between $2,000 and $10,000. Just want to touch very briefly on football. Importantly, on the weekend we had another successful weekend of football in the north, albeit under COVID conditions, and given the ongoing challenges being faced by Victoria, after approval from Public Health, Tasmania will host the AFL match between St Kilda and Fremantle this Sunday at Blunston Arena at 12:15 p.m. The regular COVID safeguards, including a requirement that spectators wear masks and a capped crowd, will be in place. The AFL COVID controls are well practiced, and the charter flight for both teams using a sterile corridor will be utilised. Fremantle will be coming from low-risk WA, however the protocols will remain in place, accepting that they can, like any other West Australian, fly on the day before the game. St Kilda will, like other teams have, fly in on a charter flight the morning of the game, won't engage with our community, then will leave straight afterwards. Players in the travelling group are subject to regular testing, and importantly, both teams will leave directly after the game is completed. So, in summary, we know Delta is very challenging. We know it's unforgiving. You only have to look at the challenges that are being faced now in other jurisdictions. Importantly, continue to be aware of your own personal hygiene and safety when mixing in large groups. Follow the public health advice. Cover your coughs and sneezes. Stay home if you're unwell. Don't hesitate to get a test, even if you have only mild symptoms. As soon as the opportunity is there for you, please vaccinate, don't wait. I'll hand over to Dr Veach now before we take some questions in a moment after Kath finishes.
Thank you, Premier, and good afternoon. I'll just say a few brief comments around two of the jurisdictions, and then I'll be happy to take questions. As the Premier said, we're in a position today to redesignate Queensland as a low-risk state. And that means that the 11 local government areas in southeast Queensland that involve Brisbane and the Gold Coast and the Sunshine Coast will change from high risk to low risk from midnight tonight, as will Cairns and another nearby local government area in far north Queensland. So that means that people will be able to come here from Queensland without restriction, provided they haven't been to one of the high risk premises that are still listed on the website. And it also means that a number of people who have been subject to a stay-at-home requirement from having been in Cairns area recently will be released from that requirement at midnight tonight. And the reason for that is sufficient time has passed since there were cases in the community in southeast Queensland, and the progress of the investigation and testing around the Cairns case has progressed well. Such that the risk to Tasmania from people coming from Queensland is now low. So that's very pleasing. Unfortunately, yesterday it was necessary to designate 10 local government areas in the Northern Territory as high-risk areas, and they're 10 local government areas involving Darwin and Katherine a bit to the south. So they were declared high-risk areas from 4 p.m. yesterday, and applied to anyone who'd been in any of those areas since 11 p.m. last Thursday, the 12th. We also applied a stay-at-home order on people who had come to who are now in Tasmania and arrived before 4 p.m. yesterday, who had been in the Darwin, Palmerston or Katherine local government areas between 11 o'clock last Thursday night and 4 o'clock yesterday. The investigation in the Northern Territory is underway. They're currently in lockdown in those areas. There have been no further cases detected, which is good to know, but I think it's probably going to be another 48 hours before we know whether there's been any spread from that case who came into Darwin from New South Wales. The other points the Premier made, New South Wales and Victoria, we're retaining our current restrictions on the entry that have been in place for several weeks, and the ACT is seeing increasing numbers of cases in their outbreak. It's up to 45 now. We declared that a high-risk area last week, and I think it's going to be a few days, probably another week or so, before we know whether the ACT has achieved good control of their outbreak. But I'd be happy to take any questions.
Can you talk us through, Dr Veach, about the transiting rules through New South Wales? Say if you were driving your car through New South Wales, is that now officially banned? You can't do that and come to Tasmania?
If you drive your car through New South Wales, you'll be regarded as having been in a high-risk part of New South Wales, and you'll be required to go into hotel quarantine, if indeed you're allowed at all to enter Tasmania. And that's at the discretion of the Deputy State Controller. And the reason for that is, unfortunately, the spread of coronavirus into New South Wales. The worst affected place in regional New South Wales is currently around Dubbo, and they've very quickly had well over 100 cases in the Dubbo area. There's a quite mobile population in that area, and there's definitely concern for risk occurring along the transport routes in New South Wales. So it's partly the COVID risk. The other thing we really don't want people doing is getting in a car on the Queensland border and driving non-stop without stopping to Victoria, that's just not safe. So this is really to address both those risks.
On the website, on the coronavirus website, it says that transit through Sydney Airport is still allowed, but Public Health is reviewing that. What sort of threshold, what sort of circumstance would it be that transiting through Sydney Airport wouldn't be allowed?
I think if things got worse in metropolitan Sydney, if there was evidence of transmission in those airport hotels or in those surrounds, very fortunately, the COVID safety plan seemed to have held up in most of those settings so far. But given the amount of coronavirus in New South Wales, we have to be alert to the possibility that permission we've allowed people to have to just stay in the airport hotel, if they're moving between, for example, flying into Sydney and flying out to Tasmania, that's been acceptable. But if the risk of being in those hotels increased, we would reconsider whether or not we would still let people to not undergo quarantine after arriving here.
There's previously been concerns raised about the safety of AFL teams travelling from high-risk jurisdictions. What can you say ahead of this weekend's game to reassure the Tasmanian public that it is safe?
The AFL has had a bubble in place that limits the movement of their players, and they get very extensively tested. And to date, I think there was one person who was identified after returning from overseas quite early in the season, might have even been last year, but their bubble seems to have prevented their players getting infected with coronavirus, and that's very important. So even though there is a team coming from Victoria, they will still be subject to the requirements of the AFL bubble, and they will all have a test 24 hours before they arrive here, and they're not allowed to travel or play until we receive the result of that test done within 24 hours of travel. When they get here, there'll be a bit of biffo with the Fremantle players, but they're not allowed to have any contact with the Tasmanian public, and they return pretty directly after their flight back to Victoria.
In terms of local footy, will the mask wearing rule for NTFA games be reviewed?
Yes, we're considering the mask wearing rules. In all likelihood, we will create a general requirement for mask wearing across larger gatherings and football games over the coming weeks. We're clearly in a situation where Australia-wide the risk of COVID, the risk of Delta strain, is significantly higher than it's been for many months. There's simply the greatest number of cases in the country. We have really good border measures here, but every state, really except Tasmania, has had community exposures from cases so far this year. We've certainly had one case, but mercifully with no community exposures of significance. So we really do have to have some measures in place that acknowledge the risk and mitigate it. If you have someone who, despite all best intentions, is infectious with COVID at a football game, it's so much better if they and the rest of the crowd are wearing masks. The likelihood of substantial spread is much less. So it's really an insurance measure. Most of the rest of Australia is very used to putting masks on and off, and I really hope that Tasmanians will come to realise in a quite matter-of-fact way that wearing a mask in these more crowded public settings is something that you can do to reduce your risk.
When will that decision be made, and how will it be made consistent across?
Well, I'm working with our events management teams to work out how we do that. I was just going to mention one other thing that came to mind then, if I may, that I should have mentioned. Yes, the case that we had in Tasmania the week before last now, the investigation of that case is nearly complete. Almost all people who were in quarantine as a result of being on the plane or in the corridor where that person moved have now been tested and released from quarantine. And by tomorrow, I think the last around 10 people who are subject to quarantine requirements will be released from quarantine. So that's great news.
Have we been extremely lucky in that respect with that case?
If we look at cases of coronavirus, a small number of cases seem to give rise to a large proportion of cases. Most cases don't give rise to extra cases. but some of them give rise to a large number of cases. So you have to treat every case as if they could be that one case that's going to spread to a lot of people. So I think not so much lucky, we applied the right kind of controls around that gentleman and the people who are in contact with them, and it's pleasing that it appears that none of them have become infected.
Is there any likelihood that we could open to regional Victoria instead? Obviously Melbourne's just the place in lockdown right now. Could we open to regional Victoria in the near future?
I think not in the very short term. Victoria has had, their outbreak is not completely under control. It started in Western Melbourne, but they've now got a cluster of some concern in southeastern Bayside Melbourne. They know the links between most, but not all of their cases. And they've had a couple of wastewater samples that have gone positive in their regions. So there's a little way off before we're confident that regional Victoria is safe.
I just wanted to check about the tighter New South Wales transit rules. Could that affect freight into Tasmania at all?
No, it shouldn't affect freight. Freight is a separate consideration that we recognise as a essential service, and there were some discussions at National Cabinet, I think last week, and an arrangement for a testing regime set in place. We do already have a testing process for freight travel, so I think that provides us with appropriate levels of risk management for freight. If, of course, the risk increases, then we can always tighten up those requirements.
Hand over the capital.
Thank you, Dr. Veitch. At the start of the Super 6-week vaccination program announced last week, we committed to opening up more than 45,000 first dose appointments in Tasmanian government community clinics. In the last 5 days, we have added 10,800 new first dose appointments into our booking system. There has been strong support for the program so far, with over 6,500 dose 1 appointments being made since last week. We are now in week 26 of the rollout, and more than 231,000 Tasmanians have had at least one dose, and 144,349 Tasmanians are now fully vaccinated. As at 15 August, we have delivered more than 381,087 doses across Tasmania, which is made up of 200,975 doses in state government clinics, 181,095 doses by the Australian government provider and by general practice. The target group of the Super 6-week vaccination blitz are those Tasmanians who are aged 30 to 59 years. It is very pleasing to see that almost 50%, 49.7%, have now received a first dose. The number of Tasmanians aged 70 years and over vaccinated continues to grow, with 85% having had one dose and 58% being fully vaccinated. Our 60 to 69-year-old age group continues to grow, with over 74.5% having had their first dose and 34.5% fully vaccinated. We now have 43 community pharmacies on board that will help us lift this rate closer to 85% mark in the coming weeks. Pharmacies delivered over 300 vaccinations over the last weekend. As the Premier said, from next Monday we will start our schools program, where we will deliver in-reach vaccination clinics to colleges, extension schools and non-government schools to vaccinate our 16 to 18-year-olds. We will start this at Elizabeth College, offering vaccination to 850 students, including those Year 11 and 12 in the high schools in the area. The clinic will be in place from Monday the 23rd of August until Wednesday the 25th of August, and will then return to the school 3 weeks later to deliver dose 2. There is no need for parents of 16 to 18-year-old students to book. We are making arrangements directly with the colleges and schools for each clinic. The statewide schools program is just being finalised now, and I'll be able to provide more information about where the clinics will set up later in the week. For young people under the age of 18, our preference is that the decision to be vaccinated is reached jointly with your parent or guardian. If you are a parent of a 16 to 18-year-old, please have a conversation with your child to discuss the vaccination program that will be coming to their school and complete the consent form together. I've taken further advice on the issue of consent and note that in some circumstances, students over the age of 16 may be able to give their own consent following discussion with a nurse immuniser. However, our preference is that this is a conversation first off between a parent and a child. Children that fall into the 12 to 15 year age group will need to attend vaccination appointments with their parent and provide consent. Students in the college program will be able to collect a consent form from their school or print one off at home for a conversation with their parent or guardian. We'll also have consent forms available in 64 different languages to assist our students who come from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds. For those students who may not want to be vaccinated in a school setting, they are welcome to make a booking at a community clinic or a participating GP clinic offering the Pfizer vaccine. As the Premier said, we will run super vaccination clinics in both Hobart and Burnie over the next few weeks. There are lots of appointments available, so please book in right now if you are in the 30 to 59-year-old age group so that you don't miss out. In addition to these super clinics, there are hundreds of available appointments in Kingston over the next 4 weeks, in Blunsdon Arena Clinic in September, Hobart City and Moona from mid-September onwards, South Launceston from mid-September through to early October, and Devonport at the end of October. From this Sunday, the Burnie Clinic will be relocated from the Lifesaving Club to the Burnie Arts and Function Centre to give us greater capacity to offer more doses. And this will be where the Super Clinic will happen on 11 and 12 September, offering 1,400 doses across the 2 days. A reminder for residents on Bruny Island, we'll be bringing a clinic to you on Wednesday 25 and Thursday 26 August, and there are appointments available now on both days. If you have not had a chance to get a first dose and you live on Bruny Island, then please take the opportunity to get your dose next week. A public health direction has now been signed requiring COVID-19 vaccinations for all aged care workers commencing on 17 September. Again, I urge aged care workers who have not yet had a first dose to take advantage of the InReach vaccination clinics that will be coming to your facility, or to make a booking now at our government community clinics. In closing, if you are in our 6-week vaccination blitz target cohort of 30 to 59 years old, then please don't wait. Get your appointment now while we've got appointments available. And you can make that appointment by calling the Public Health Hotline or by booking online. And as we remind Tasmanians every day, the best way to safeguard yourself, your loved ones and your local community is to get vaccinated. So open for questions.
Are there any operational questions for Don Evans?
Not seeing one. Unless there have been any further infringement notices issued, James.
We'll go to questions for the Premier.
The TCCI has asked you to release the government's plan for dealing with COVID in line with the PESRAC report. What are you able to say to them?
Well, look, as has been pointed out to the TCCI in recent days, there is a significant amount of information already available in terms of the government's response to COVID. In terms of their request for a 3-pager like South Australia have, I would make the point that firstly, when you look at the response from every jurisdiction as they've dealt with Delta, almost on a daily basis, their response has changed. In fact, even yesterday I noted that the Premier of Victoria announced for the first time in this outbreak a curfew was being introduced. We've had the New South Wales Premier that has gone from looking at this on a local government arrangement to regional to statewide to looking at a whole range of different outcomes and interventions to manage COVID. Now, I'd hope that we could provide some further information later this week, but the point that I would make on this is that every incursion of COVID, especially the Delta strain, will be different. We've had one that was in hotel quarantine, and we dealt with it through tracking and tracing and ensuring that our systems quarantined those individuals that had been in close contact and tested, and at the end of the day we didn't require a lockdown. If that case had been loose in the community, it would depend on whether or not, for example, with tracking and tracing, we were able to identify a small number of people that had come into contact and quarantine them immediately. That may not necessitate a lockdown. But then, should that have been an incursion that touched more individuals, a lockdown may be required. What I would say to those that are calling for the details of what a lockdown would look like and whose liberties we might impinge upon, What we're focused on at the moment is a lockout. We're strengthening our borders. We're ensuring that our processes are as robust as they possibly can be, because we don't want the virus to get in here in the first place. But I have heard the community's call and the TCIs, and we'll provide some further information later this week. But I want to make the point that every incursion will be different. And as we've seen, every leader in every other jurisdiction, almost on a daily basis, has been reacting to their own particular circumstances at that time.
So PESRAC's requirement that's now quite some time ago was perhaps not anticipating that every response is going to have to be customised to a particular situation, that you can't give much detail because it's going to be so general in nature that...
Well, I'd make the point in terms of the broad-based plan, the SESEMP, the state emergency management plan is already available, and the response is there in detail in terms of how we dealt with the northwest outbreak, but also then how we have pivoted as well and improved as a result of that. But if there is to be an incursion, and as I say, I note that there are some out there calling for statewide lockdown plans. I would hope that we don't get to that. But as I've said, we'll provide some further detail this week to provide a guide. But it's important that we are able to respond to the individual circumstances of the individual incursion.
Tasmania's role be in developing the vaccine passport alongside the Northern Territory and Victoria?
Well, we're currently engaged in discussions with both of those jurisdictions, and we're working through what those issues might be.
Why did we opt to join the working group?
Well, in fact, I took the opportunity on the basis they were looking for a large state, a smaller state, and also a territory. And I thought that Tasmania was well placed to provide some input into that.
The travel industry wants consistency across the country to make it easier for travellers to understand. Do rogue states like WA need to come in line with the proposal?
Well, look, I haven't seen anything that the WA Premier might have said today, but I did note that he reserved the right to ensure that as a sovereign that he could take his own decisions. As it stands, Tasmania have signed up to the national plan, but through that national plan, as we step through the stages, should we need to respond to an incursion or to an event that's occurring in another state, then I would never, ever abrogate my responsibility away to do that.
In terms of the vaccine passport, how do you imagine that would be used for Tasmanians?
Well, that's exactly what we're working through at the moment.
Have you spoken further to the AFL about the timeline for their response to the Carter Review, what they're going to do?
Yes, I have. In fact, after the press conference on Friday, I spoke directly to Gil McLachlan and expressed to him my disappointment. I also spoke over the weekend to the chairman of the AFL, Richard Goyder, and again expressed my disappointment. I'll be having a further discussion with Gil McLachlan tomorrow afternoon on this particular matter.
And what are you expecting that discussion to cover?
Well, look, I haven't changed my position. I expect the AFL to do what it said it would do, and that is after the release of the Carter report that later this year, or by the very latest, early next year, the presidents would be in a position to make a decision on whether or not we would receive a licence or not. And we want that timeline to be stuck to.
Have you had a chance to see the results of the ALP review on the investigation into David O'Byrne?
Well, I'm aware that it appears that the ALP review have said that there is no case to answer. I'm also aware that Ms Midson, I think, has made her position perfectly clear. What is clear to me is that there are questions that Ms White needs to answer. Does she believe that that report and the conduct of that inquiry is robust enough? And what does she say to Ms Midson in terms of the issues that she has raised, as I understand it, this afternoon?
Is it concerning to you that it hasn't been made, there's no transparency in terms of the report being made public or the findings or recommendations of the report?
Well, a secret report, I think, is one that will just lead to further questions. Now, at a bare minimum, I think that findings and recommendations should be released. But again, I'd make this point. It's pleasing that Ms White is back at work and appears to be fit and ready to go. Well, this is the first matter that she needs to deal with, and I think that she needs to explain her view on the matters that have been raised by Ms Midson there are questions that need answering, and that's a matter for Ms White.
Does it surprise you, given the behaviour that Mr O'Byrne admitted and his learnings about the nature of consent, that there were no adverse findings made and no action required out of this investigation?
Well, all I can comment on, again, I haven't been a party to this report. It is secret. Ms Midson has made her position perfectly clear in terms of her view on the outcome of this report, and therefore I think that Ms White has questions to answer as the leader of the Labor Party as to whether or not she thinks that this has been a robust enough process, as to whether or not she thinks that this report should be kept secret, and importantly, as to whether or not she's prepared to provide further detail in terms of its findings and its recommendations.
Thanks all.
Thank you very much.